The wind carried a cry at dawn, thin and piercing, like something torn loose from the night. Clara Boone, midwife and widow these 6 years, stopped in her tracks. She had been walking fence lines with her shawl pulled tight, checking for calves tangled or rails split by the storm that blew through. What she heard was not calf nor colt. It was the cry of a baby. Her boots pressed into the frost-stiff grass as she followed the sound. Breath smoked in the cold. The prairie lay wide and bare, yet the cry came sharper, pulling her like a hand at her sleeve. Past the sycamore stump, along the barbed wire that bordered the northern line, she saw it. A bundle lashed to the fence post, blankets snagged on the barbs, tiny hands writhing against the sky. The child's face was raw from wind, his lips blue-edged. Whoever left him had bound him there to die slow. Clara's heart lurched. She ran, skirts catching on thorns, fingers bleeding as she tore the blanket free from the wire. The baby wailed as if his little body knew death had brushed close. She pressed him to her breast, wrapping her shawl tight. His warmth was weak, but present. Breath still drew. She whispered nonsense words, the kind she used for birthing mothers, steady and soothing. "Hush now, little one. I've got you." That was when she saw the boot tracks. Heavy, deliberate pacing circles in the frost, like a man had lingered to watch. And on the post itself, tied beneath the baby's blanket, was a braided cord of rawhide. At its end hung a loop, a hangman's knot, small, cruel, mocking. Clara stared, throat dry. This was no abandoned babe. It was a message. Her hand tightened on the child. She glanced over her shoulder, the hairs on her neck prickling. The prairie stretched silent. Only the creak of the wire fence and the baby's hiccuped sobs filled the air. But she knew men's eyes could hide anywhere, watching. Clara lifted the braid, held it to the weak morning light. Someone wanted her to see this. Someone meant for her to know the noose was waiting, not just for the child, but for whoever dared take him in. For a long moment she stood in the frost, with fear pulling hard at her ribs. A widow alone, no kin to shield her. The smart thing was to turn back. Fetch the sheriff. Tell him she found nothing. Let the law handle whatever wickedness this was. But she thought of all the births she had seen, the way life clawed itself into the world bloody and screaming, refusing to be denied. She thought of her own child, buried before breath had ever filled her lungs. And she thought of the empty rooms of her cabin, echoing with silence that no prayer had filled. Clara pressed the infant closer, kissed his brow, tasted salt and cold. "Not today," she whispered. "You don't die today." She tucked the braid into her apron pocket, the noose's weight heavy as iron. Then, with the baby snug against her, she turned toward home. The walk back stretched endless, each gust of wind sounding like hooves behind her. But she reached her cabin, bolted the door, and laid the child in the wooden cradle her late husband had carved before fever took him. The boy's cries softened, replaced by small, gasping breaths. Clara built a fire, warmed milk, and fed him with trembling hands until his lips no longer looked blue. Only then did she let herself sag to the floorboards, staring into the flames. Her life had just shifted. She knew it as sure as she knew her own name. When the knock came that afternoon, it was no gentle tap. It was a fist, hard and heavy, rattling her door. Clara rose, the baby still in her arms, heart pounding. She opened the door to Sheriff Deeks, his frame filling the threshold, his hat shadowing eyes that glinted cold. He looked from her face to the child and back, and his mouth twisted. Well now, he drawled. I reckon you found yourself some trouble. Clara didn't answer. The baby stirred against her shoulder, a tiny sigh escaping him. Deeks stepped inside without asking, boots thudding on her clean boards. His gaze slid to the cradle, then to the shawl still draped near the fire. He sniffed, as if scenting guilt. That ain't your kin, he said flat. That's evidence. And evidence belongs to the law. Clara's fingers tightened on the child. He's a baby, Sheriff. Not a piece of evidence. Deeks's eyes narrowed. He tipped his hat back slow, revealing a smile that held no warmth. You keep him, you'll swing for it. I swear before sundown, if you don't hand him over, I'll see a rope fit for your neck myself. The baby whimpered, and Clara's breath caught. She looked at the sheriff, at the cradle, at the shadows twitching on her walls. She had taken the child in. Now the gallows stalked close behind. The sheriff's boots echoed as he left, leaving the door open wide to the cold. Clara shut it, pressed her back against the wood, and closed her eyes. The baby's weight in her arms was heavier than any noose. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the faint rattle of a rope against wood. Clara hardly slept that night. The baby's breathing came in shallow puffs, each one forcing her to listen, count, and pray the next would follow. Every creak of the timbers sounded like boots on her porch. When the wind rattled the shutters, she sat upright, certain it was the sheriff's hand on the latch. She kept the iron poker close by the fire, though she knew against a badge it was little more than a twig. At dawn, she washed her face in cold water and looked in the mirror. Lines of exhaustion carved deeper than her years. Yet something else had taken root in her eyes. Not just fear. Resolve she had sworn when she plucked that child from the fence that she would keep him alive, whatever the cost. The baby stirred, rooting for milk. Clara warmed goat's milk on the stove and fed him with a rag-wrapped spoon. When his eyes finally closed, lashes resting like fine threads on his cheeks, she studied the blanket once more. The corner bore a ranch brand, J over split bar, Caldwell Iron, the most powerful name in the county. If this was a Caldwell child, or tied to their shame, it meant danger stretched wider than anyone's sheriff's rope. By mid-morning, word had spread. Neighbors came under pretenses. Mrs. Pike with a jar of honey, though her eyes darted to the cradle more than the jar. Old Ben Caro, hat in hand, muttering about stray calves. Yet he lingered by the door, curious. Folks had seen the sheriff ride out of Clara's yard. Tongues wagged, and wagging tongues often built nooses. When Ezra Toll arrived, he did not pretend. The blacksmith filled the doorway like a mountain, his leather apron dusted with soot. "Widow Boone," he rumbled, voice deep as an anvil strike. "Word says you found something at your fence." "True?" Clara hesitated. Ezra's eyes were steady, honest in their weight. She nodded, drawing back the shawl to show the baby. His cry rose faintly, and Ezra's jaw worked. By God. A child, his gaze slid to the blanket, to the branded patch. His mouth set hard. That's Caldwell's mark. Clara nodded again. And this. She pulled the rawhide braid from her apron pocket, the red banker's twine gleaming in its core. Ezra swore low, shaking his head. Everard's cord. I've seen him bind contracts with it. Bank and ranch, sheriff too. This whole mess stinks like a hog pen. Before Clara could answer, hooves clattered outside. Sheriff Deeks rode up with 2 deputies at his back, dust rising in the cold air. He dismounted slow, his spurs ringing. Clara felt her throat tighten. Deeks didn't bother with knocking this time. He stepped onto the porch, voice booming. "Widow Boone, it's past time. Bring the child out. Evidence belongs to the county, not your cradle." Ezra moved before Clara could. He stepped onto the porch, hammer still at his belt. "She's not handing him over." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "This ain't your fight, blacksmith." Ezra's chest rose, broad as the doorframe. "Anything tied to a gallows is my fight." The deputies shifted, hands near their guns. Clara felt the baby stir, whimpering at the tension. She forced her voice steady. "This child is no evidence. He was left to die on barbed wire. That makes him a victim, not property." Deeks sneered. "A victim can't testify." "Evidence can. Don't play clever with me, widow. You've got till sundown. If the boy ain't in my jail by then, you'll swing for obstruction. And I don't reckon the crowd will shed tears for a woman who stole from the law." He mounted again, spitting into the dirt. "Sundown," he repeated, then wheeled his horse and rode back toward town. His deputies followed, leaving only dust and the echo of threat. Ezra turned, his brow furrowed. "They mean it, Clara. He'll twist the law to hang you, and half the town will nod along." Clara's knees weakened, but she clutched the baby tighter. "Then we find proof. Not just cloth and cord, proof enough to choke their lies." Ezra studied her, then nodded slow. "There's talk of ledgers in Everard's vault, and contracts signed quick between him and Caldwell's daughter. If we bring them to light—" "Where do we look?" Clara asked. "Preacher Lyle," Ezra said. "He was witness to a contract not 3 weeks past. If anyone knows what's writ in ink, it's him." The baby whimpered again, as if sensing the storm gathering around him. Clara rocked him gently, though her own heart rocked harder. Sundown was only hours away, and if the sheriff had his way, that rope in her pocket would be her own measure. Ezra gripped her shoulder, rough but steady. "We'll go to Lyle. We'll pry this rot into the open. But you'd best be ready, Clara. Once truth sees daylight, men like Deeks and Everard don't bow, they bite." Clara looked at the child in her arms, his small hand curled against her shawl. Fear coiled deep, but fiercer still was the vow she had made at the fence. She would not surrender him. Not to law, not to lies, not to death. Outside, the sun slid lower, each inch marking time toward the gallows. The church bell tolled low and slow, though no service was called. Clara stepped into the chapel with the baby, wrapped snug against her chest, Ezra close behind. The place smelled of pine oil and cold stone, dust motes swirling through the last rays of daylight. Preacher Lyle stood at the altar, his hand resting on a thick, leather-bound Bible. His face lit when he saw Clara, then fell when his gaze landed on the bundle in her arms. "Lord have mercy," he whispered. "They said, but I didn't want to believe it." Clara drew the shawl back, letting the lamplight fall on the child's face. His lips pursed, his eyes blinked, and he gave a soft coo. "I found him tied to wire," she said. "With this." She pulled the rawhide braid from her apron, the red banker's thread flashing like a drop of blood. Lyle's jaw tightened. "I saw that cord once before." On the banker's desk, his hand trembled as he reached for the braid, but didn't touch it. "I should have spoken sooner. I should have burned the paper when they put it before me." "What paper?" Ezra asked, his voice like iron on stone. The preacher looked down, shame folding his shoulders. "A marriage contract," Silas Everard and Eliza Caldwell. 3 weeks ago. She was pale as snow, her father's hand heavy on her back. There was talk, hushed talk, of a child born too soon, a stain to be washed away with vows and land titles. I signed witness, though my heart knew sin was inked into the lines. Clara pressed the child closer, her breath sharp. This baby, he's theirs. Lyle nodded once, the motion pained. And Everard meant him gone before he could claim a name. The baby whimpered, small fists kneading her shawl. Clara kissed his brow. Not while I breathe. Ezra paced, his boots booming against the planks. So the sheriff's rope ain't law at all. It's ledger work, and we're the ink they aim to blot. He stopped and planted his hammerhead against the floor. If we show the town the contract, if they see the brand in this cord, they'll call it forgery. Lyle interrupted. Deeks will roar lies till the crowd hears only his voice. His eyes darkened. But there's one place truth still holds weight, under the gallows tree. If Everard and Deeks mean to try you at sundown, then let it be their trial too. Drag their sins into the lantern light. Clara's heart lurched at the word sundown. Already shadows stretched long through the chapel, night crawling fast. She remembered the sheriff's promise, a rope waiting, eager for her neck. She felt the baby stir, his cry catching, thin and frightened. Her throat closed, but she forced her words steady. If we face them there, we'll need more than scripture. We'll need proof enough to choke their lies. Lyle's hand pressed flat to the Bible. I will swear what I saw. Ezra can swear what he found. And you? His gaze softened on Clara. You will swear what you chose. Mercy instead of silence. Boots scuffed outside. Clara froze. Ezra's head whipped toward the door. Then a voice slithered through the cracks. Smooth, patient, familiar. Friends, called Silas Everard. Step aside and no harm comes. The widow must learn her place. Bring the child, and order remains. Defy, and chaos will burn this town to ash. The baby wailed, the sound slicing through the wood like a blade. Clara clutched him, her knuckles white. The chapel door shuddered under a heavy blow. Ezra roared, bracing the chain. This house ain't yours. Another crash. Splinters jumped. Lyle's voice rose in prayer, half plea, half battle cry. Clara's knees shook, yet fire caught in her chest. She stepped toward the pulpit, holding the baby high. If you call him property, she shouted, voice ringing through the rafters, then you will watch this town decide which of us is worth saving. The pounding stopped, silence falling thick as smoke. Then came Deek's growl, low and promising. You've had your hour, widow. Sundown's near. At the gallows, we'll settle it, once and for all. Boot steps receded, leaving only the wind's hollow whistle through the cracks. Clara sagged, her breath coming hard. The baby whimpered, then stilled against her heart. Ezra put a hand on her shoulder. You've said it now. They'll drag you to the tree. Clara looked at the infant, at the life pressed a fragile and fierce against her. Then that's where we'll bring the truth. The bell tolled again, each strike pulling them closer to night. They left the chapel at dusk, moving into a sky the color of a bruise. Wind combed the prairie grass into restless waves. Chimneys coughed to smoke, and lanterns winked alive along Main Street as if the town were lighting its own jury. Ezra walked at Clara's right with his hammer slung across his shoulder. Preacher Lyle took her left, Bible open, lips moving in a prayer that sounded more like a vow. The baby breathed warm against Clara's collarbone, his tiny fist captured in the fold of her shawl, as if he held on to the only rope that mattered. Word always ran ahead of trouble. When they stepped into the open square, half the county was already gathered by the Gallows oak. The tree's limbs reached like black antlers into a sky that held one star and a mouthful of ash. Sheriff Deeks stood under the heavy branch, with his thumbs hooked in his belt and the noose coiled over one shoulder like a pet snake. Banker Silas Everard waited beside him, kid gloves pale as bone. He held a leather ledger against his ribs, close as a psalm book, and smiled with the patience of a man who thinks time is furniture he can rearrange. "Widow Boone," Deeks called. "Step forward. Bring the babe. The people will see order done." Voices rippled through the crowd. Some pity, some hunger. Mrs. Pike hid behind her husband's arm. Old Ben Caro spat without aim. A pair of Caldwell hands shifted their weight and did not meet Clara's eyes. Clara lifted the rawhide braid high, the red banker's thread catching lantern light. "This is the cord that bound him?" she said, her voice carrying clean. "Found on the fence where someone meant a child to die. And this blanket bears Caldwell's brand. Ask yourselves why banker cord and ranch iron meet on a baby's skin. Ask why a sheriff calls breath property and a ledger calls infants' items without names." Everard's smile did not move. "Hysteria," he said calmly. "Grief has a sound. We honor it, then we return to sense. County protocol exists, so sentiment does not drown us all. Bring the infant to my desk by sunrise, and the widow need not face consequences for her confusion." Lyle raised his Bible. 3 weeks passed. I witnessed a contract between this banker and Eliza Caldwell, he said, voice thick with shame and steel together. Her father pressed her signature like a brand. There was talk of a child misdated, of a stain to be washed in ink. I signed today another witness. This boy is no item. He is the reason their paper was written at all. The crowd swayed, conscience and fear wrestling behind eyes. A woman cried out that God would see. A man shouted that hunger would see faster. Sheriff Deeks took the noose from his shoulder and cast it over the limb with a lazy, practiced toss. The loop swung like a question. "You will hand the babe to the county," he said, "or you will hang for theft of evidence and incitement. I advise choosing the door that opens." Ezra stepped in front of Clara, hammer across his forearms. "You want to touch her? You pass me first." Deeks's smile traveled no farther than his teeth. "Then I pass through you." The rope creaked as the sheriff hauled it down and tied the free end to the hitching rail. Ezra's knuckles whitened on the hammer handle. Lyle's thumb worried a frayed edge of gilding from his Bible. Clara's heart could not decide whether to pound or hold still, so it did both in turns. The baby hiccuped, a small sound in a big dark. Everard lifted his ledger as if offering a hymn. "Dry Creek," he called, "you think yourselves kind. Kindness without order is a flood. Floods drown crops, floods ruin children. Civilization requires that we do not let accident run our days. This infant will be placed according to regulation. This widow who took him will stand aside and be grateful for our system." A dozen heads nodded. A dozen more shook. Then a voice cut in, flat and common as dust. "System did not tie the wire," it said. A deputy at the line of men in rifle coats had spoken without permission. There was age in his voice, and a crack of something like regret. Deeks's head turned, slow and dangerous. The deputy looked at the ground fast, resolved to remember he had said nothing. Pressure gathered like storm. Clara felt it on her skin, that minute before lightning when the world holds its breath. She raised the braid again and threw it at Everard's feet. "This is your cord," she said. "Deny it." Everard did not bend to pick it up. He looked at it as one might look at a snake and decide it has no fangs. "Cord is cord," he murmured. "Every desk has some." "Not braided with red like your writs," Ezra growled. "Not slicked with wax from your seal," Lyle added. "Bring her," Deeks ordered. He gestured, and two men pushed forward. Jed walked among them, hat low, jaw tight. Clara recognized how guilt makes a man smaller. He did not meet her gaze when he reached for her arm. "Don't, Jed," Ezra rumbled. "I got children," Jed rasped. "Feed runs short when the bank shortens it." "Then remember what a child sounds like," Clara said, lifting the infant so the tiny cry brushed his ear. "Remember tonight before you sleep." Jed flinched like the sound struck his teeth. His hand fell away. Deeks swore and motioned to another man. This one had no tremor. He grabbed Clara's elbow hard enough to numb it and shoved her toward the oak. Clara stumbled but did not fall. She would not fall for them. She fixed her eyes on the rope swinging lazy and tried to pull her breath down where it could be used. Fear stacked itself in her throat like kindling. She forced words through it. "If I die," she said, "let it be speaking." "You'll die," Deeks said, learning when to be silent. The crowd pressed in a ring. Lanterns hissed. Somewhere a horse stamped and tossed its bit. Lyle stepped with Clara, not touching but close, as if a shoulder could be a wall. Ezra prowled outside the ring, looking for a place to break it. The baby's breath warmed Clara's skin with tiny drafts that felt like reasons. They halted under the branch. The loop hung at her temple height, a dumb crown. It smelled of tar and old sweat and the last sins of other men. Clara swallowed hard. This would be the place where even brave words could become wind. This would be the place where a town decided whether a ledger could outvote a lullaby. Deeks nodded to the knot. "Say your last if you want to." Clara lifted her chin and let her voice carry. "I found him tied to a fence," she said. "I found him with his banker's cord, wrapped in Caldwell cloth, marked by men who feared daylight on their deeds. And I kept him. That is my crime." Mercy, she set her palm over the child's narrow back. "I plead guilty to Mercy." A murmur rose like a weather change. It rippled through hats and shawls and reached places in people that rarely saw use. Mrs. Pike started to cry soft, more apology than grief. Old Ben muttered that he never liked the banker's smile. One of the Caldwell hands spit and missed, and seemed sorry the spit had landed where it did. Everard's voice sliced clean. "Enough. Sheriff." Deeks set the noose swinging wider. "Bring it." A hand landed on Clara's shoulder then, not rough. She turned and saw a deacon from the chapel, Mr. Howes, eyes darting like mice in a cat yard. His breath smelled of fear. "Forgive me," he whispered, and then did not. He snatched the baby with a speed born of shame and thrust the child into a deputy's arms. "Evidence to county," he said hoarsely. "Let the widow answer for theft. Let the rest of us go home." The baby wailed, high and frantic. That newborn siren that tears men who still possess a soul. Ezra roared and surged. Two rifles snapped up, blocking him. Lyle lunged for the deputy but caught air and prayer both. The deputy backed, clutching the child in thick hands, eyes huge at the noise in his ear. Clara's knees buckled. The world tilted. From somewhere far off, she heard her own voice, ragged and low. "Do not." Deeks grinned with all his teeth. "Now we are tidy?" he said. "Widow, your neck." Something in Clara that had been fixed since dawn cracked and spilled light. She stepped toward the deputy, hands open, her voice not loud but hard enough to cut. "You give him back," she said, and even men with rifles meant for Ezra felt the command in it and flinched. "You want to hold something for the county, Sheriff, hold your own badge. It belongs in evidence." "String her!" Everard snapped, patience blown. "Turn this page." The deputy faltered, the child shrieking against his chest. Jed stared at his boots. Ezra planted and bent, a bull ready to break a fence or die inside it. Lyle lifted his Bible high enough that lantern light passed through a thin page and made scripture glow. Deeks set the loop around Clara's neck and drew it snug until breath found out it had limits. The rope rasped, fiber on skin. The crowd leaned in, faces close and ugly with the pleasure of not being in the loop. Clara did not struggle. It dignified their story. She stood still as a nailed beam, eyes on the child and no one else. Then a voice rose from the darkness behind the ring. A woman's voice, torn and clear. "Stop," it cried, shaking the night. "By God and by my name, stop." Lanterns swung toward the sound. A figure stepped forward. Shawl askew, throat bruised, eyes wild with a kind of truth no ledger can bear. Eliza Caldwell walked into the light. The deputy froze. Ezra straightened. Deeks blinked as if dawn had arrived wrong. Everard's gloved hands tightened on the ledger until leather squealed. Eliza pointed at the banker and the rope and the child at once. "I have words you cannot burn," she said. The noose rested at Clara's throat, and the town held its breath on the lip of its own future. The air between lanterns and shadows seemed to tear when Eliza Caldwell stepped forward. The bruise at her throat looked like a purple badge, and her shawl clung as if she had run from hands that had tried to silence her. The baby's cry softened at the sound of her voice, as if recognition lingered even at that age. Deeks's hand twitched on the rope at Clara's neck, but the crowd shifted, and for the first time all evening, the sheriff looked unsure. Eliza's voice wavered, but never broke. "That child is mine." The words rang like a shot. Taken from me before breath, branded like cattle, buried alive on paper so men could feast on land that did not belong to them. She pointed a trembling hand at Everard. "This banker made me sign away my own womb, called it shame, called it debt. And Sheriff Deeks swore to keep it tidy. Tidy with rope, tidy with ink." The ledger in Everard's arm seemed heavier, and his smile, so practiced, faltered. He opened his mouth, but Ezra's roar drowned him. "You hear that? The blood is living, and the mother stands. Ledger's worth ash now." Deeks tugged the rope to reassert control, but even his deputies faltered, staring at Eliza as if a ghost had materialized. Jed finally raised his head, voice raw. "She's telling it straight." I heard the banker speak it plain. Called the boy an accident that had to be tidied, same word. Thought no one listened. Everard snapped. "You were paid to keep your mouth shut." But the hiss of the crowd was louder. Murmurs, angry as bees, spread. The Caldwell hands shifted uneasily. Loyalty to kin pulling them one way, shame another. Clara forced herself to breathe against the tightening rope. You see? She gasped. Who has their neck in this loop? It is not me. Lyle stepped forward, his Bible held high like a lantern. This tree has stood for justice once, when a horse thief swung here 20 years ago. Let it stand for truth tonight. Cast your eyes. Sheriff, if you raise that knot, it tightens on your own soul. The sheriff growled, sweat darkening the brim of his hat. This town dies without order. Ezra's hammer swung down, splintering the hitch rail that tethered the noose. The sudden crack startled the crowd, the rope slackening just enough for Clara to tug free. She ripped it from her throat and dropped it at Everard's feet. Order built on killing infants and widows is not order, she said. It is rot, and rot cannot stand. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the preacher's voice rolled through the square, low but heavy. Lanterns here. Let us have trial now. A trial under sky and stars, where God is witness. The people shifted like a tide. Mrs. Pike pushed forward, tears streaking her cheeks. I will not see another mother broken. Others muttered agreement. A Caldwell hand threw his hat down, cursing the banker's name. One by one, voices rose against Everard, against Deeks. The sheriff drew his revolver in desperation, but Ezra's hammer struck his wrist, sending the iron clattering to the dirt. Deeks fell to his knees, cursing, his authority bleeding out faster than his pride. Everard held his ledger higher, desperate now. You fools, he cried. Without this order, you are nothing but dust and chaos. Land, money, law, all mine to keep you alive. But Eliza stepped up and ripped the ledger from his hands. Pages fluttered like frightened birds as she tore them free and flung them into the crowd. Men and women caught them, read aloud the damning lines. Unclaimed infant disposal, fee paid. Widow Boone property seizure. Marriage contract, signature coerced. Every word was a nail in Everard's coffin. The banker lunged to reclaim his pages, but Jed's rifle butt stopped him cold, sending him sprawling. The ledger fell open in the dust at the base of the gallows oak, its words exposed for all to see. The crowd howled, not of celebration, but of awakening. Fury and shame mixed, and for the first time the town saw itself in the mirror. Clara held the child high, his wails subsiding as his dark eyes opened wide to lantern glow. This child is not evidence, she declared. He is breath. He is tomorrow, and if tomorrow hangs, then all of you are already ghosts. The silence that followed was deeper than prayer. Deeks groaned on the ground, clutching his wrist. Everard whimpered under the boots of men who once bent to him. Ezra placed a steadying hand on Clara's shoulder, and Lyle closed his Bible with a soft snap that sounded like judgment made final. At last, old Ben Caro spat again, this time squarely on the banker's glove. Justice, he muttered. Ain't tidy. But it's done. He turned away, and others followed, leaving the banker and sheriff bound by the very rope they had meant for Clara. The square emptied slowly, lanterns dwindling one by one, until only a few stayed to guard the disgraced men. Eliza stood trembling, but freer than she had ever been, her eyes on the child. Clara stepped closer, lowering the baby into her arms. For a moment, Eliza held him as if he were weightless, her tears dripping onto his blanket. Then she kissed his forehead and placed him back against Clara's chest. You found him first, she whispered, and you saved him. Raise him, Widow Boone. Raise him to never fear rope nor ink, her voice cracked. Raise him to live. Clara nodded, her throat too thick for words. She watched Eliza walk into the night, shawl drawn tight, but her back straight. Ezra and Lyle stood beside Clara as she faced the gallows oak once more. The rope swayed gently in the breeze, empty, as if ashamed of what it had nearly done. She drew the baby closer, his small breath against her heart. Tomorrow the town would wake to reckon with itself. But tonight, under the oak, she had already chosen. Mercy would not be called crime, not while she had voice and breath. The child shifted, sighed, and drifted into sleep. Clara turned from the gallows, carrying him home,